Good evening to you all, and thanks for being here this evening. I'll call this special, well, it's not special, it's a regular work session to the Garner Chamber, excuse me, the council who are in the council chambers, excuse me. I'll get it all right in a minute, but at any rate, this is our work session this evening. So we're dispensing with some of the ceremonial stuff we do at the beginning of the meeting, and we'll just jump right into the meeting. I will take a moment just to, since those of you who are here, maybe most of you know about this, but those who may be watching either live stream or otherwise, that the Wall That Heals is in our town. There was a ceremony today at Lake Benson Park, and the wall will be constructed tomorrow and officially open. It'll be here for 4 days, I believe, so I encourage any of you who are aware of that to consider going out, and it's open 24 hours a day, and I'm sure some of you are volunteering for that anyway, but it's neat to have that in our town, and appreciate all of those who are volunteering to assist with the process out there, so be aware of that if you will. Okay, having said that, Council, I will entertain a motion. Well, excuse me, let me get a roll call first. I'm sorry, if you will, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Marshburn.
I'm present. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Vance.
Here.
Councilmember Dellinger.
Here.
Councilmember Behringer. Here. Councilmember Singleton.
Here.
And Councilmember Matthews.
Here.
Okay, thank you so much. Council, you have the agenda before you there. I'll entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
Second.
Okay, moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no, and there is no opposition. All right, we have before us there 3 discussion items before we move into manager's report. So I'm going to recognize Mr. Seckler, our HR director, and he has a gentleman with him that I think we all know. So any introductions necessary, Mr. Seckler, we'll rely on you to do that. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I am joined this evening by Mr. Paul Sidor from Independent Benefit Advisors. Roughly 2 months ago today, at the work session in January, Paul and I came before you and we shared with you some of our thoughts and some of our plans with regards to the steps that we were going to take to get to this point this evening to make recommendations to you with regards to our health renewal, as well as some of our other benefits renewals. So I'm pleased to be here before you this evening to be able to share staff's recommendations with you, get your thoughts on those, and hopefully be prepared for open enrollment and then our new benefits plan starting July 1st, the first day of the new fiscal year. So I'll go ahead and go through the presentation. Certainly feel free to stop me if you have questions. As I mentioned, Paul is here to answer questions as well as we go through this. So I'm going to start with, I guess, what I've come to call an executive summary, just to give you a high-level overview of what things look like, and then I will go into detail on each one of these. So from a high-level perspective, our health plan, we're looking at, based on our recommendation, an increase in the cost by 1.9%. We're not looking at any changes in cost for the town or for employees for our dental plan. There will be no increase in cost for our voluntary vision plan. There's no change in cost for our life insurance and our disability insurance. And there's no change in cost in our recommendations for our COBRA and flexible spending administration for the upcoming fiscal year. Regretfully, we do have an increase of 17.7% in our retiree Medicare. That's the prescription drug costs. I'll go into a little bit of detail there with regards to that, as well as our retiree Medicare Supplement, which is increasing by 9.4%. So let me take each one of these, talk you through at a lower level of detail with regards to those recommendations. So when Paul and I were here in January, as we have done for the last several years, we have looked very closely at changing from a fully funded health insurance model to a self-insured model. I would say this year we took an even deeper look and strongly wanted to try and make that recommendation to you tonight. Regretfully, based on some risk analysis, based on some analysis of claims, we just do not feel comfortable making that recommendation to you tonight. I think we will get there, and we'll probably get there sooner rather than later, but regretfully, this is just not the year to do that. So we are recommending that we stay with Aetna and that we stay with a fully insured plan. Now, as I mentioned in the executive summary, regretfully, that results in a 1.9% increase in our premium costs over the costs for this year. That does, however, come with the fact that we're not making any changes to the benefits. The networks aren't changing. None of the co-pays, deductibles, co-insurances are changing as well. We are making a recommendation that we hold the employee contributions the same for dependent coverage. And the way that we're making that recommendation is, as you may recall, last year, in addition to a reduction in our rates from Aetna, we also received approximately a $197,000 rebate. We took that rebate and we put it aside. We did not spend that money last year. And so we are making a recommendation to keep our staff members from having to bear this cost, that we use a portion of that rebate, a little bit less than $5,000, to cover that 1.9% increase. By doing that, in essence, we keep the costs identical, the premium costs identical for this, from this year for next year. We will continue to maintain 100% town paid premiums for staff members that completed the wellness reward program. And in essence, we are continuing with our 35.1% contribution on dependent premiums as well. We are going to continue to offer the two plans, both the traditional plan, which we've had for a long time, and the choice plan, which is a lower cost plan that we have had for the last 3 years. So the good news here with our recommendation is, even though we're seeing that 1.9% increase, the net to our staff members and to their covered dependents is that there will be no changes in any premium costs for the upcoming year. There'll be no changes in any of the program benefits, deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance. There'll be and there'll be no changes with regards to the fact that we're offering both the traditional plan as well as the choice plan. So while we weren't able to make the recommendation to you tonight to go to self-funding, we feel that this is our next best option. And by being able to keep the cost the same and not changing any of the benefits or any of the plans, we feel pretty good about this recommendation to you. So if there are no specific questions, I'll move on. But if there are questions, I'm happy to entertain those at this point.
Okay, let me just check to see if any council member wants to question at this early stage. Anybody? Okay,
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
continue.
So the next thing I want to talk about is our dental plan. We are making a recommendation that we do not change the premium equivalent costs for the dental plan. The reason why we use premium equivalent is our dental plan is self-funded, so there's technically no premium, but we create a premium equivalent, which is the cost that the town and our staff members pay for that. We've had a very good 12-month period. Our loss ratio for the previous 12 months is at 81%. So we're doing very well with regards to our dental plan. As I mentioned, we're self-funded, and we use Delta Dental for our administration. Working with IBA, we were able to negotiate a 3-year rate guarantee through June of 2025 on our administration fees, so we won't see any cost increases or changes in our administration fees over the next 3 years. So good news story with dental, no increase costs to our staff members, no increase in costs to the town. Our vision plan, which we implemented last year and is a voluntary plan, we're not recommending any changes here as well. We had 94 covered individuals on this vision plan, which is pretty good for the first year of offering this program. The costs are paid entirely by employees, and there's no cost to the town for our vision plan. There will be no changes in benefits or costs, as again, working with IBA, we've negotiated a 4-year rate guarantee, again, through June of 2025. Our life insurance and our disability insurance, again, no changes in premium costs. The town pays life insurance, accidental death and dismemberment, and short-term disability for all of our staff members. And then our staff members also have the opportunity to buy up additional voluntary life insurance and accident, death, and dismemberment. And with Reliance Standard, who is the vendor that we work through, we have a 2-year rate guarantee. We're halfway through that now. That will expire in June of 2023. Our COBRA and our flexible spending administration, there are no changes in the administrative fees. Our flexible spending accounts will renew on June 1st of this year. COBRA administration will renew in October of this year. And the vendor that we use is called iSolved, which is formerly Infinisource. And again, working with IBA, they were able to help us to negotiate a 1-year rate hold through June of 2023. So there'll be no cost changes there as well. This is where we see a little bit of a change in terms of cost. All of our staff members who qualify for retiree medical are on the Medicare Part D drug coverage plan. That plan regretfully increased by 17.7% this year. As I mentioned, it's the Medicare prescription drug coverage for our retirees. That renewed on January 1st. We have our coverage through AARP and United Healthcare. We made a change 2 years ago to go to United Healthcare from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and even with this 17.7% increase, we are still realizing a lower cost structure than had we stayed with Blue Cross Blue Shield. So regretfully, the costs have gone up, but we're still managing those costs, and we're still at a lower cost threshold than we would have been had we not made the change from Blue Cross Blue Shield 2 years ago. And lastly, our Medicare Supplement, which is the supplement for hospital and medical coverage for our retirees. That is going up by 9.4%. That renews on June 1st, and that coverage is individual by individual, but it's through Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. There's no change there in terms of the organization that we use, and regretfully, part of that premium cost is just inflationary as health insurance continues to increase in price. Let me share with you a little bit with regards to the timeline as we move forward. Our hope is that based on my presentation to you tonight and any feedback received, that we could have our recommendations or any changes that you request approved on consent next Monday night. That allows us to then begin the planning process and open our open enrollment period from May 2nd to May 20th. That allows each staff member to make changes if they so choose without any penalty. It's the one time a year that we're allowed to do that because of the pre-tax nature of these plans. Those changes are then input into the system, and the first deductions, which start with health care, come out 1 month in advance. So those deductions would be realized in our staff members' first June paycheck. And then all of the changes that were made, bless you, during open enrollment would become effective the first day of the new fiscal year, July 1st of this coming year. At this point, I will stop and see if anyone has any questions, or Paul, anything that I missed?
Okay, thank you, and council, thank you, Mr. Sheckler, for the presentation. Pretty well laid out in terms of the time frame, so probably no. I guess I maybe need to go back to, I will ask one question.
Sure.
In regards to being able to keep the premiums as they were, we took some funds that were part of, well, explain to me where the funds came from. I know they were, you said there were 5% of those that was taken out, is that right? Or was it $5,000?
$5,000.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
okay.
So
I need to get my facts straight.
yeah, so last year when we worked with Aetna, they gave us a 5.5%.
Oh, you're close.
Okay.
I
believe it was a 5.5% reduction in our premium rates, but they also gave us roughly $197,000 in a lump sum check.
And I mainly was just going to ask, the remaining funds are still there,
Yes.
available?
Yes, sir. And our hope was, and still is, that $197,000 could be used as our pool if we went to a self-funded model to help us to kind of have a jump start on having money in that pool to cover the claims costs.
So that would just sort of stay there?
Yes, sir. Yep, we
Available
would
for
just,
future
we're going to
uses.
use a little bit less than $5,000 based on this recommendation to pay the 1.9% of the cost for the dependent coverage, but the roughly $192,000 that remains would continue to remain there with the thought process that hopefully sooner rather than later, we could use that to help us jumpstart our self-funded model.
Now the fund, I assumed it would stay there for?
Yes.
It's not at this point planned to be used for now?
Sir.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Council members, I'll start with Mr. Matthews down here if he has any questions.
I thought it was a great presentation and very informative. You guys have done your homework, and we'll just move forward with the times being what they are. But good presentation.
Thank you very much.
Stingley, any questions, sir?
Yes, so the Medicare Part D coverage, that 17.7% increase already started first of the year. They're on the calendar year. Our stuff
Correct.
is on the fiscal year, and then the Medicare Supplement is on June 1st instead of July 1st.
That's right.
You have to
They're-
dance around the dates.
Yep.
Okay.
And then regretfully, with InfiniSource, our COBRA starts June 1st, or I'm sorry, our COBRA starts October 1st, and the FSA starts on June 1st. So that some of the dates are all over the map.
Whatever. All right. Thanks for the information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Behringer, anything? Mr. Ellinger?
No questions. Thanks for the information and for all the work you guys put into making the comparisons to make the recommendation.
Vance?
No formal questions, but I will also say great work, good job.
Okay, are we not going to require Mr. Slider to come forward here this evening? I'm sort of teasing about that, but
You want to say anything?
I'm not suggesting that he should. I mean, your presentation didn't get any questions, so that's fine. I just want to acknowledge his presence, and if he has anything to add, that's fine, but if not, that's okay as well.
He does all the work behind the scenes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
And
it.
this will be on consent then at our next meeting, right?
Next Monday. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Some of you may not know, I'm always intrigued, but at any rate, this gentleman will be, I believe this is weekend out running in a very long race here in the area here. He's quite the runner, and so maybe he's the epitome of a person who's at least in good health for running anyway. But commend you for that, and I hope it goes well for you out at Umstead Park, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Thank you very much.
Good luck to you on it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right?
Thank you all very much.
Sure. 100 miles, by the way, to be running. Okay. All right, I think we will next hear from Chief Smith, the Police Department, who will be talking to us about a reorganization she's proposing, and we look forward to hearing your report, Chief Smith.
So Mayor, members of council, thank you. I'm here tonight to talk to you about a proposed reorganization of the police department. So the proposed reorg currently utilizes our 74 sworn staff, so our current resources. This will be implemented upon your approval in 2 phases. Phase 1 would occur on May 9th, Phase 2 occurring on July 4th. And as part of this request, I'm asking to reclassify a patrol officer to a deputy chief, a sergeant to a lieutenant, and also to reclassify an additional patrol officer to an Internet Crimes Against Children investigator. You'll hear me refer to them as an ICAC investigator. So phase 1 would be the re-implementation of the deputy chief, and the other 2 would occur during phase 2 on July 4th. So what's the purpose in the reorganization? So when I was appointed chief back in December, one of the things that I was tasked with was to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of our current staffing model. We wanted to look at the allocation of our resources to make sure that they were effective, that they would allow us to implement crime reduction strategies, and also help us increase our community engagement. We also wanted to create, or need to create, a sustainable staffing model that will allow us to provide more district accountability, oversight, and supervision, and one that would accommodate future growth. And this is an area that I really wanted to highlight tonight. The town's growing. We're growing quickly. And so as the town grows, the police department is going to grow as well. So with this restructure, one of the things that we looked at, we maintain a 5-year staffing plan. And this year, we spent a lot of time and effort making sure that our requests for staff were data-driven and data-based. So we worked with planning and other departments within the town to try to accurately project the growth and what the population would look like. So the national recommendation, according to the FBI, for the ratio of police officers to residents is 2.4 officers per 1,000 residents. We are currently at 2.2 officers per residence here in Garner, which we have consistently been at for several years. So with that being said, we are looking at the need to ask for an average of 6 officers per year over the next 5 years to maintain our current staffing levels, our current standards. That's not asking for the 2.4, that's just to maintain current levels at 2.2. So this is why it is important with looking at the restructure and the reorg to make sure that we have something in place that would accommodate the need and that growth. The structure would also allow for us to add additional personnel both at the supervisory and officer rank and also in specialized positions as we continue to grow. And then one of the other areas that it addresses is succession planning. We have had a lot of institutional knowledge and experience retire over the last few years, and we're going to continue to see that. So the structure also allows us to identify future leadership and provide planning for succession. So phase 1, May 9th, this would be the reinstatement of the deputy chief's position. If you're not aware, we had a deputy chief up until 2016. When Deputy Chief Copeland retired, we went away from that model and went to the 2 captain position. Again, as we're continuing to grow, I think it's important that we have reinstate this position, 1, to help with oversight of the growing department, and also 2, redundancy, to make sure that in the event that something were to happen to the chief, that there would be someone with redundancy and that transition would be seamless and have less impact on the department and morale as well. So the immediate cost to implement the DC position, and this would be May and June of this fiscal year, is just under $3,500. And then the other parts that would occur on or about May 9th would be the backfilling a vacant captain's position created by the promotion of the deputy chief and backfilling a lieutenant, sergeant, and corporal. Additional movement, not to try to get down too far into the weeds, but there would be some semantics, some name changes. Operations Bureau would now become the Patrol Division Bureau. And then administration would become support services. CID would fall under support services. Professional standards would move under the chief's office. And then there would be a name change with the community services lieutenant and the support services lieutenant. And so this is what the org chart would look like as of May the 9th. And if you can see, we still have platoons A through F under the Patrol Bureau, but we're holding a vacancy for the Patrol Lieutenant. And then you'll see that CID falls under Support Services. So not a lot of changes here, significant changes. So Phase 2. One of the biggest requests, in addition to reinstating the deputy chief, is I want to implement 2 watch commanders on the back-end patrol at the rank of lieutenant. This would help create more oversight on the patrol and also have a watch commander on scene in the event of a critical incident. So currently, we would with reclassifying the sergeant's position from E and F platoon would allow us to have the second watch commander, and then we would transition the current patrol lieutenant's position to get the other watch commander. And then again, on July 4th, in addition to promoting the 2 lieutenants, we would also backfill a vacant sergeant and corporal position. And the approximate new annual cost for the implementation of the new lieutenant would be just under $8,200. And so again, we currently have an E and F platoon, and as of July, E and F would be dissolved. One of the E sergeants would again be reclassified to give us a lieutenant. The other sergeant would become a community services sergeant, which would allow us to split job responsibilities between our current community services sergeant to give us an SRO sergeant. It would also help with our span of control. And then we would also put 4 officers back on patrol platoons A through D while transitioning that 6th position on the EF platoons to give us our ICAC investigator. And then the approximate cost to do that for the ICAC investigator would be about $3,200. And so this is the final structure of what the police department would look like in July. So again, adding a deputy chief, transitioning the Operations Bureau to the Patrol Bureau, and then also renaming the Admin Bureau to the Support Services Bureau. And a lot of those admin functions, such as budget and other things, would transition to the Deputy Chief position, while the Primary Internal Affairs would stay with Professional Standards and would answer directly to the Chief. And with that, the overall cost, ongoing new cost as of July, would be roughly $102,614. And that is with the reclassifying a police officer to deputy chief, reclassifying the E-sergeant to a lieutenant to give us a watch commander, and also the police officer to the ICAC investigator. So with your approval, we would hope to see this on next week's consent agenda so that we could move forward with restructure. And at that point, I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you, Chief Smith. Again, you laid it out pretty well in terms of your reorg plan, it looks like. I'll start with Councilmember Vance to my right if he has any questions and or comments.
No, I do not, Mr. Mayor. It seems pretty comprehensive and straightforward.
Okay, Mr. Dellinger, anything?
2 quick questions. And thank you for the information and thanks for taking this on. The first question, actually I'll ask the second question first and then I'll get to the other one. So you mentioned the 6 sort of positions a year for the next several years, which of course is sort of in line with our growth projections and all that. What positions will you be filling, on that yearly basis if you were able to get them? And if you don't have specific positions, like what parts of that org chart would you be filling out? And if you don't have specific positions, what are sort of your priorities as far as where you see the existing holes are or the growing gaps are in terms of what types of officers will you be hiring?
So with the structure that we would have in place in July, obviously, as we continue to grow and expand, we're going to have property right now that's being planned to be built out Rock Quarry and Auburn-Knightdale, and then we have property at 401 and 1010. So obviously, we need to expand our patrol division. But we're also looking at, we have a vision to actually have an intel unit, which could fall under the crime analyst. And we talk about community engagement and community service. So for us to do what we want to do, we need to have more than a community liaison officer. One person can't accomplish that. So we would like to continue to build on, under community services, to have a team. And that's part of having that community services sergeant transition over. So we would look at adding additional resources there, as well as, you know, we're going to have to look at adding an additional resource officer if Bryan Road Middle comes on board. And as always, looking at our investigations division and then also our training division. We are working on a comprehensive wellness program, and again, in order for that to be effective, we need to make sure that we have the staff and resources in place.
My other question has to do with hiring and retention. And I know that's a challenge everywhere, and we're doing well relative to our peers, I think. And I guess my question is, what do you see are sort of the larger hiring and retention challenges that are in the market, and how will we tackle them in terms of moving forward as we bring on more people and keep the people we have? And what are we doing that is making us successful, and how do we keep doing that?
So we're very fortunate. We are not facing a lot of the challenges that some of our peer agencies are with regards to staffing. We currently have one vacancy, and I gave a conditional offer this week, so hopefully we should be fully staffed here within the next month or so. What are we doing well? I think our salary is good. I think our benefits are good. Obviously, you know, we can always find room to improve there. However, I think the biggest thing is culture, making sure that we create a culture where officers feel supported and feel as though they have the ability to grow and develop and have specialty positions, somewhere to move and somewhere to develop. So that's a big thing for us, to make sure that we continue to provide that culture where people want to come to work. And having a good community, having support from our managers and having support from council, it makes a difference, because other agencies aren't as fortunate. And it does impact hiring, and it does impact retention.
Behringer?
So we're going to be asked in May to approve, or consent agenda upcoming, approve the $102,614 increase in next year's budget.
Yes, sir.
So we already know we're going to increase in next year's budget $102,614 if we approve that. All right, just want to make sure we all know that. That's what we're agreeing to.
Potentially upon your
Potentially, yeah. We've
Potentially.
had conversations about that, so
Yes, all right.
we got to get a better idea where we stand with the budget, and we're working through that right now. So, you know, the chief and I have talked that, you know, depending on what the budget looks like, we may have to try to fund some of this out of the existing budget they have, but we'll look at that when, you know, in the next few weeks.
We'll make sure that's what we're talking about, okay? Thank you for the presentation and the detailed information.
Mr. Matthews?
Thanks, Mayor. This is a great presentation, and I often had wondered why was the deputy chief position moved. I had the opportunity today to be down in Clayton, and I'm always hanging around with policemen for some reason or other. A lot of the Clayton police were there, and different ones, and we were talking, and how Garner was doing versus Clayton, and the chief was spot on. Everybody around us has got issues and really don't have a whole lot of idea how they're going to remedy these things. This is a great schematic. You've got a natural progression for officers as they come in, starting at the corporal level, could eventually one day become a chief. There's a progression there, which is good, and that keeps good people. Reminds me of my military days a little bit, but and Garner is growing in the areas you're talking about. We've got to McCullough's Crossroads out in the country, Bethel, we're growing, and we're going, I think, Councilman Dillinger put it well, we got to be proactive toward this thing and make it happen. Yes, like everything else, there's a cost affixed to it, but it sounds like you got a good handle, you got a good game plan here, and I like it, and I can support this.
Okay, I believe every council member's had a chance to comment, and while I won't steer the conversation in a different direction, I do want to, and this is not part of your reorg plan, but I want to just either ask the question or comment on the what I call the external programs you have. I'm thinking about PAL, thinking about, I was going to ask you if you're still continuing, I believe you are, the barbershop. I call them barbershop chats. That's probably not the right name.
The barbershop rap sessions?
Yes,
Yes, sir, we
yes.
are.
Okay, so all those programs are still effective and going well as far as you're concerned?
They are, and part of the expansion that we'd like to do is to expand those. We've had a lot of interest in some of the beauty salons. We've had other barbershops or barbers reach out and say, hey, we want to be part of this too. Right now, we currently offer it on Saturday mornings, but there's, I would like to call them community conversations, where we do some things during the week and in the evenings and just other times other than Saturday to make sure that we're connecting with our community and finding out what they need from us.
Yeah, I mean, looks like a good organizational chart to me, and Mr. Singleton's point is well taken. It will cost some additional money if we go forward with this, but we'll see what the budget figures that the budget team brings to us, I guess. But thanks again for your work. It's good to see you out at the park today. And so, unless there are any other questions, we'll move to the next item. Okay, thank you, Chief Smith. Sure enough. All right, our next item on the agenda, financial strategies update. Okay. David will introduce this, I suppose. Davenport's here.
Got all these files in his arm. I'm starting to wonder who's going to be handing those out to us, or I'm assuming we're going to.
I'm going to come without books.
I know you're
I'm squirming over here a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, good evening. I will do a brief introduction here for Mitch, who you're all familiar with Davenport, who are our financial advisors. We've recently asked them to update the debt model that you all are familiar with, and we've asked them to look at kind of where we are currently, and then also potentially some additional debt we could take on to either reimburse ourselves for some of the purchases we made recently, like the Forest Hills building, the bank building, and also potentially fund renovations of the Forest Hills building. So they have incorporated that into their model, and he's here to share that with you tonight. And then following his presentation, I have a staff presentation that goes into some of the ARP and CARES dollars. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Thank you very much. And good evening, sir. We're glad to see you back again.
Mr. Mayor, members, good to see you all again. Appreciate you having me this evening. Gonna maybe take this a little more quickly than we normally do. I know you all have seen a lot of this information in the past, but there are some very good updates that we want to share. So I'm going to maybe take a moment on the front end just as a quick refresher on where you are, just big picture with your credit ratings, right? And when we talk about entering the debt markets, we've got a new referendum that we're going to be able to fund through the GO bonds. So going to be entering the capital markets, and one of the big drivers of the interest rates that you all will be able to achieve on those GO bonds will be your credit rating. And you all have a very good credit rating at a AA1 by Moody's. So if you look at the chart on the bottom left, that AA1 is one step away from the highest you can be at AAA. And then with S&P, you are at AAA. So you're the highest of the high. So very good credit rating that will serve you all well when you issue the GO bonds to help achieve the lowest interest rates you can. And as part of this planning process, we want to make sure you all have a sense of the decisions that you all make and doing those within the context of your policies and hopefully, to the extent possible, maintaining these good credit ratings as you enter the capital markets. So for a little bit of perspective on that, as we go through the presentation, we're going to look at a series of peer comparisons as we go through looking at some of your key debt ratios. And when we do that, we're going to compare you to national cities that are rated by Moody's AAA, AA1, which is, again, that category that you all fall into, and AA2. And then we're also going to look at those same three categories, AAA, AA1, which is your category, and AA2, which is one step below you, for the North Carolina rated cities and towns. And I always find it interesting, you can see there who's rated AAA, AA1, and AA2 within the state of North Carolina. So as we go through this, you're going to see us reference some of these peer comparisons. So I want you to know who all is in that analysis. Okay. So starting out with your debt, we're going to look at your existing debt profile. You all have approximately $39.5 million of debt outstanding. The bulk of that is in the GO bonds that you all have issued in the past through the last referendum, about $35.2 million, $35.1 million of GO bonds. A little bit of installment financing contracts, and then some rolling stock financings, vehicle type financings that you all have done. In total, $39.5 million. It will all be paid off by fiscal year 2040. And very conservative debt structure where you have a declining debt structure every year, meaning your existing debt service payments are getting lower every year as you go out in time. And that's part of what's going to help you take on this new debt from the GO referendum and any other financings that you may choose to do in the coming years. We're going to look at a series of debt ratios here when evaluating your existing debt portfolio, really to help us determine capacity for issuing future debt. And the first one of those key ratios that we're going to look at is in the far right column, the 10-year payout ratio. This is something we've talked about over the years, and you all have a policy on this ratio. And essentially what it measures is the percentage of the principal outstanding, so the percentage of that $39.5 million that you are paying back over the first 10 years or the next 10 years of worth of payments. So in this case, your fiscal year 22 10-year payout ratio means between fiscal years 22 and fiscal year 31, you're repaying 62% of your total debt outstanding. A little more detail on that on page 6. You can see it graphically on the left, and superimposed is that red line. That is your policy. You all have adopted a policy to maintain a minimum 10-year payout ratio of 50%. This ensures that when you're issuing new debt, you're repaying it in a responsible fashion. So you all are at 62% there in fiscal year 22, well above your policy. And on the right side is this first peer comparison that we're going to look at. Let me walk you through it so you know how the others will be set up. So at the top, Garner is in the gold bar. You all are at 62%. The light green bars right below that are the national medians for the AAA rated cities. Again, that's one notch above you. The AA1 rated cities nationally, where you are, and the AA2 rated cities, that one notch lower than you all are rated. And what we're graphing for you here is the medians, or the average of all the data points that make up these rating categories. Similarly, we're looking at the medians for those same categories for the North Carolina rated, Moody's rated cities and towns, in the dark green bars right below it. In addition to these medians or the averages that we're graphing for the North Carolina cities and towns, we've also included the light blue bars on top of that, which represent the minimum and the maximum cities that fall within those categories. So it's providing you the range of data points in addition to the average for North Carolina cities and towns. People are at different cycles in issuing debt. If you've issued a lot of debt recently, for example, from a GO referendum, you may be on the higher end of your rating category, whereas somebody who hasn't issued debt recently may be on the lower end. So we try to give you a little bit more perspective with those North Carolina medians and providing the range of data points there. In summary, you all are at or slightly below the medians, but certainly well within that range of data points for this ratio. So in good shape compared to your policy, in good shape with this peer group, we would say that you have capacity to consider debt under this ratio. It's reasonable for you all to be looking at a new referendum, issuing debt under your new referendum. Okay? Similarly, on 7, debt to assessed value, your debt as a percentage of your tax base. In fiscal year 2022, you all were at about 0.8% debt to assessed value, and you have an adopted policy of not to exceed 2%. So you all, again, well below your policy limits on this key ratio. When projecting out this ratio, I think it's important to note, we know exactly what your existing debt payments are and how they're changing over time. What we have to project is your assessed valuation going forward. And so we've coordinated with staff on this to understand how you all are looking at these things internally and some of the projections you all are doing. We do have the 22 budgeted assessed value and the current estimate for fiscal year 23 plugged in. And then going forward, we have estimates that staff has helped us develop based upon recent activity and announcements and things that are going through the approval process right now. So you can see there, we're assuming 7.5% growth in 24, 7% growth in 25, 6.5% growth in fiscal year 26. Those are kind of the specific growth assumptions that we have. And then beyond that, we've defaulted to maybe more of an inflationary growth assumption of 2.5%. So just wanted to let you know that these growth assumptions are informed. Certainly, we don't know exactly how that's going to evolve over the long term, but at least here on the near term, we're trying to get a little more accuracy in these projections, which will also play into some of the other projections that we look at going forward. Okay? Just quickly on the right-hand side, again, you all are in good shape on this ratio. Maybe slightly higher than the medians for the North Carolinas, in line with those medians for the nationals, but well within those blue bars, well within the range of those rating categories. So no concerns from our perspective on this ratio. We would say you have capacity, again, under this ratio to be considering issuing additional debt. Okay. Similarly, last one, page 8, debt service to expenditures. This is the other last debt ratio that you all maintain a policy on. This is your annual debt service payment, so your annual payment of principal and interest as a percentage of your overall town governmental operating budget. And so when doing this calculation, it's a measure of not just your debt burden, but also of your budgetary flexibility, right? Because you issue the debt, you know what your annual payments are, you have to make those annual payments. There's nothing you can do, short of a refinancing, right? There's nothing you're going to do to change those debt payments. You don't have as much flexibility intra-budget year to make adjustments. So it's a measure of debt load as well as budgetary flexibility. You all have a policy not to exceed 15%. You are currently at just under 10%, at 9.45%. So again, in good shape compared to your policy, And then when you look at the gold bar, and I should note, we've got this labeled 22, it's actually 23 that we've graphed here, fiscal 23. When you look at that gold bar, you're in good shape compared to those medians, kind of right in line with the AA1 median, and certainly well within the various ranges. So taken as a whole, these three key debt ratios, I think, speak to the strength of your existing debt portfolio and the fact that you have capacity to consider taking on additional debt. Talked about it during the lead up to the referendum. Obviously, if you didn't think you had capacity, you wouldn't have put it on the ballot, but just wanted to provide this update and this confirmation that we do have capacity to consider taking on additional debt in the future. The related question is cash flow or affordability. How much cash flow do we have to be able to repay the debt? And again, you all reviewed that as part of the referendum process and developed a plan. And as usual, we have a very small chart on this. And I might even be able to zoom in if y'all would like me to. Yeah, there we go.
It's much better to me.
There we go. All right. So left-hand side of the page, columns A through H, or column A is all done by fiscal year, but columns B through H are your requirements, okay? So columns B, C, and D represent your existing debt service payments, that $35.5 million of debt outstanding. What we're showing here is the principal plus interest payments on that $35.5 million of principal outstanding. Column B is your base debt service. Column C is a vehicle loan, rolling stock loan that you all took on recently. And then column D is the water capacity debt. And we break those last two out separately because they have different revenue sources to repay them. Okay. Column E, the highlighted column, is where we're going to layer in the new debt service assumptions when we look at a series of cases here. Okay. Columns I through P are your revenues available for debt service. So column I goes back to the original referendum plan in 2013. Your budget at that time, you had locked in what you were budgeting from the general fund at $759,047. Very specific number, but that was your budget at the time in the general fund that was going towards debt service. You had some other dollars that were going towards debt service, but that was from the general fund budget that you were able to lock in without impacting your budget needing new revenues. So we've locked that in, and staff has continued to budget that every year for debt service going forward. Column J is the tax rate that's currently dedicated to debt service. Again, as part of that original referendum, 2.75 cents was dedicated to debt service. As part of the recent revaluation, that was adjusted downwards to reflect the reval and the revenue neutral. So it's currently 2.28 cents. So it went from what was the original 2.75 cents down to the 2.28 cents as part of that revaluation process. Column K is the water capacity fees that you have collected over the years. Those dollars have been set aside from collecting those capacity fees, and that is going to be applied to repay. Oh, got a little too zoomed in there. That's going to repay column D, that existing water capacity debt. So you see column D totals $1,270,000, and we've got $1,270,000 of those fees that have been set aside over the years to repay that debt service. We've talked about the ability to pay off that debt early at times when it makes sense, but we got to factor in the prepayment penalty as part of that process. So that's something we've kind of flagged to revisit going forward in the future to see if it ever makes sense to take the dollars that have set aside to repay that debt early if we can get out from under any prepayment penalty. So we'll continue to track that. Column L is where we're going to use the revenue savings plan dollars, right? So put a hold on that column. We'll come back to it. But right now, with your existing debt, projecting only to need $1.5 million of the revenue savings plan to repay your current debt service. Okay? And then column N is in Nancy, future general fund revenues. That is tied to the rolling stock loan that you all took on over in column C. At the time, the decision was made to do that rolling stock loan and was built into the general fund budget for repayment, not out of these other revenue sources. Okay, so we total all of those revenues up in column P, and then column Q just compares the expenses in column H to the revenues in column P to show your annual surplus deficit. Now, the other revenue source that we're assuming that you all will have starts in fiscal year 23, and that's the 2 cents that was tied to the recent referendum, right? As y'all recall, when we went through that referendum process, looked at a number of different scenarios, and ultimately settled on an amount of debt that could be supported by the 2 additional pennies on the tax rate. So we're assuming that with the successful referendum, that 2 pennies will be put in place as part of the upcoming budget process. That's what we had been looking at as part of the referendum. Okay, so that new revenue source is coming in column R. All right, finally, I just want to highlight on far right, column W, the revenue savings plan funds. Those are the annual dollars that are assumed to be set aside through the revenue savings plan. Those dollars, again, largely driven by growth, or is all driven by growth in your revenue budget, right? Over 1% growth in your revenue budget, the town has a policy to set aside 30% of all growth over 1% to go towards the revenue savings plan and fund debt service and capital projects. So as we've assumed growth in your assessed value over time, we've also applied some growth to assumed growth lower than the assessed value to sales tax and the other revenues tied to the revenue savings plan. And what we're showing in column W is the projection of how those annual dollars will grow over time. Column X is the amount we're using. Currently with our existing debt, it's $1.5 million. And column Y is that revenue savings plan fund balance growing over time. Again, this is just our existing debt, and we have the 2 pennies that are tied to the referendum built in. So as we start to layer that debt in, we'll see how this evolves over time. I feel like y'all have known me long enough that if you want to ask a question, you're going to cut me off. So I'll keep going, but if you need me to stop or slow down, please let me know. Okay. I should mention too, same growth rate assumptions in the value of a penny, obviously, as your assessed value, right? So those assessed value assumptions that we walked through earlier are going to be applied to the value that is generated by every penny on the tax rate. That's another reason why you see these dollars growing over time. Okay? So what we want to do for you now is we've kind of looked at your existing ratios, we've looked at your cash flows. How do those change as we layer in the new debt, as we layer on our GO referendum and then some other potential projects that we'll talk about? But first off, main focus is going to be the $69 million of the GO bond referendum that was approved in November of 2021. As part of the most recent CIP, the estimated funding of that is in the bottom left-hand corner. So $21.6 million in fiscal 23, $30.2 million in fiscal year 25, and $17.1 million in fiscal year 27. That's how we're assuming that the $69 million will be issued over time. Ultimately, that will be driven by the projects and the readiness of those projects when they're ready to be financed. But this is still the assumption that we're working off at this point in time. Okay. Couple other projects that we've had some conversations with staff about, and Mr. Beck alluded to them earlier. So you've made some recent purchases of property. The property building purchase for the potential town hall annex, plus some potential renovations that could be required to upfit that facility. That's a total of about $4.3 million. You had the property purchase for potential use as a future public works facility. That property purchase was about $900,000, and then long-term record storage facility project of about $750,000. All of that is initially planned or has been paid for from general fund balance, and you all could choose to reimburse yourself or fund these projects through a financing. In this case, it would be likely to be an installment financing secured by essentially a mortgage on one of those facilities, one or more of those facilities being financed. That's a total of $5.95 million. And then the other opportunity that we wanted to put out there in talking with staff is the potential to add a 2/3 GO bond to the upcoming GO bond issuance. So I'll explain that for a second. I know some of you all may have familiarity with that from prior years, but a 2/3 GO bond is a general obligation bond that is authorized by state statute that does not have to go to a referendum. And what statute says is you are allowed to essentially reissue your GO bonds capacity that you have paid down from the prior fiscal year. You can reissue 2/3 of that. So for example, in the upcoming fiscal year 23, your 2/3 GO bond capacity would be a little over $1.2 million. That is derived from looking at your debt outstanding, general obligation bond only, your general obligation bonds outstanding at the end of fiscal year 22 compared to where it was at the end of fiscal year 21. So in fiscal year 22, you retired, line 4 of that middle chart, $1.8 million of GO debt outstanding, and by state statute, you could reissue 2/3 of that without a referendum. That's $1.2 million. There would be a process to go about authorizing the issuance of these 2/3 GO bonds. It would require, a couple different actions on y'all's part and the publishing of the bond order. So there's a process to go through, but that is an option that others have taken advantage of over the years. And you could consider issuing that alongside of your voted GO bonds when you issue those. Just another potential source of GO bond issuance if you want to take advantage of it. A lot of times that's done as part of a referendum process to preserve future GO bond capacity. So if you look at it this way, if you were to utilize your 2/3 GO bonds in fiscal year 23 with that first issuance, you could save some of your future authorization to be issued at a later date. If your revenues perform better or your interest rates come in better than what was assumed in the original planning model, then you could potentially issue this debt in the future, or may be able to issue it now. We'll take a look at that, and you can decide if that's something you're interested in. Okay. So what we've done, well, before I go to the next page, what we've done is we've looked at 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, funding the GO referendum only. So what's been approved only so far. Scenario 2, funding the GO referendum plus the installment financing of $5.95 million. And scenario 3, funding the referendum, the installment, and the 2/3 GO bonds. And all of that would be done, the installment financing and the 2/3 bonds, those would be assumed to be issued in fiscal year 2023. We've got all the details of these cases in the back of this presentation, and I'm happy to walk you through it. But let me just tell you, on this summary page on page 13, you have in our opinion, the capacity and the affordability to fund all of these projects and all of these options that we just walked through. So if you go all the way to scenario 3, without any additional revenue being dedicated to debt service, you could fund the $69 million of voter-approved GO bonds, the $1.2 million of two-thirds bonds, and the $5.95 million of installment financing. You could fund all of that and still have some revenue savings plan fund balance left over as additional cushion or as additional capacity in the future. So let me walk you through, because you can afford it, let me walk you through that scenario 3. Again, $70.2 million of GO bonds, $5.95 million of the installment financing. For the GO bonds, we're continuing to assume the same assumptions, 20-year level principal and a 5% interest rate. For the installment financing, likely to be a bank financing, not going through the public markets, been a little more conservative, looking at that over a 15-year term and a 4% interest rate. Lower interest rate because it's a shorter term in this set of assumptions. You can see when we're assuming those bonds are issued on lines 7 through 13. Again, the installment financing and the two-thirds are assumed to be issued in fiscal year 23. When we look at our debt ratios, you are in compliance with your 10-year payout ratio and your debt to assessed value ratio in every year. You never breach policy on either of those through this entire issuance. There are 3 years, fiscal year 26, 28, and 29, where you're projected to exceed the 15% debt service to expenditures ratio. The highest it gets to is just over 16%, and then it immediately declines back into compliance. And I'll show you just for perspective what that looks like. In 2026, you just get over 15%. And then really it's fiscal year 28 where you get up to the 16%, and fiscal year 29 is again just over the 15%. A lot of things can impact this ratio before we get to that point. Better interest rates, your budget grows more quickly, some delay in some of the debt issuances. From our perspective, from talking with the rating agencies, no concerns about projecting this level of debt service to expenditures ratio. It's the type of thing we would suggest continuing to monitor annually, as we always do. And perhaps if we do end up in a scenario where we are in breach of this policy for a couple of years, for you all to consider making an exception at that point in time when you choose to issue the debt that would put you out of compliance. Nothing in fiscal year 23, none of the debt you issue in fiscal year 23 would put you out of compliance with this ratio.
Would out of compliance, I assume, have an impact on our AAA, 2A rating?
So, it's a consideration, but in actuality, we found you think it would be a difficult conversation with the rating agencies and maybe a negative. It almost seems to be the opposite when we have these conversations with the rating agencies, because what it shows, if you're able to go to them and say, we have a policy and we monitor our policy annually. And when we chose to put out the referendum, we knew there was a chance we might be out of compliance with our policy for a couple of years. We've been monitoring it. And with this issuance, we're projected to be out of compliance for a year or two. And we feel these projects are important, and we as a governing board have provided an exception to our policy for this issuance, and we've asked staff to keep an eye on it and get it back into compliance as quickly as possible. That's a positive, right? Because it's highlighting that you all have a good planning process in place. It's very transparent. You all are informed and are making informed decisions based upon good data, and you've chosen to offer that exception. So I think I agree with you. I mean, it feels like it would be a challenge, but in the right context and the way you all handle these type of things, it can be actually a positive conversation.
One other just general question I have, and maybe you're going to get to this, but the interest rate on bonds, is that in an increasing mode at the present time, as I understand it? I believe you projected over there a 5% rate, is that right?
Yes, sir. And there's a lot that goes into that. We've talked about it over the years with GO bonds. In the public markets, you can get what's called a premium pricing structure, where investors will pay you more than 100 cents on the dollar for your bonds, but in exchange, they want a little higher interest rate. So that's part of why we plan for a higher interest rate on the GO bonds. But generally speaking, in this market, we are in a rising market environment. Historically, rates are still very good, very low compared to where they've been historically, but they're higher than they once were. I mean, the days of sub 2, sub 1.75% 20-year debt are not there right now. But we're still, for a GO bond like this, right now you're still sub 3%, likely sub 2.5%, but we are in a rising environment. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, well, since I've interrupted, I'll see if other council members want to question or comment.
Mr. Mayor, can I just hit a
Yeah.
couple
Go
other
ahead.
quick
Yeah.
things on this summary? Last thing I wanted to mention, again, lines 22 through 24. There, under this scenario 3, there's no what we've called estimated tax impact, or no additional revenues required to fund all 3 of these potential issuances: the referendum bonds, the installment, and the 2/3. And in fact, the lowest your revenue savings plan balance gets is down to $5 million. So a little bit of cushion should things evolve over time, the revenue savings plan not grow as quickly, assessed value not grow as quickly, interest rates come in higher, you have a little bit of cushion there. And if you ultimately don't need that cushion, there's some additional capacity. We've solved for that in fiscal year 27. So once you get to that last issuance under the GO referendum, if things play out like this, you would have the capacity to issue another 10.7 million of GO bonds or other financing at that point in time. So I just wanted to give that perspective before others jumped in.
Okay. All right, council. I'll start with Ms. Behringer if she has anything. No questions. Okay, Mr. Singleton.
So the 2/3 GO bond scenario really just gives the town more flexibility. From a standpoint of that money is not designated per se to the $69 million in bonds, but it can, as mentioned earlier, because of the annex and public works facility and some other things that have been done, it gives us flexibility. If another scenario like that arises, you have some flexibility to use those funds for that or something else.
Yes, sir. You have flexibility with that. There are some authorized purposes. Well, I should say that in the reverse. There are some purposes that are not authorized for GO bond projects, and at a very high level, the easiest way to say it is it's economic development related projects are typically not approved for 2/3 GO issuance. Your parking decks, your downtown redevelopment type stuff. But other than that, you have pretty broad flexibility with what you can fund with 2/3 bonds. So, if you choose to use them for a project that you were going to use voter authorized bonds for, that preserves capacity. Or if you have a project now that you choose to fund, you've got the ability to use the 2/3 bonds to do that and maybe accelerate a project that you didn't have planned for your referendum. So you have, as you said, you have flexibility with those bonds, and it gives you flexibility going forward.
All right, that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Dellinger if he has any.
Thanks. Thank you for all the information. It's a lot to digest, but at the same time, it's going to, I guess, present itself more clearly as we get into our budget process to know what our actual budget is going into the next year as far as cash flows. And I'm seeing the expenses for the town hall and the annex and the public works, and just kind of a general question. So we have the revenue savings plan that is designated and set, it was created to support that debt service, to provide a revenue stream for that, but it can also by policy be used to do land purchases and capital. So from what you've presented, is there any sort of insight as far as potentially using a small portion of that instead of using it to finance debt, just going ahead and making the purchase and avoiding interest costs over an extended period of time?
I think that's certainly an option that you could consider. I think one of the considerations for that you all just need to think through is that you're at the front end of your referendum issuance process, right? And so a lot of the capacity and a lot of the future cash flows are based upon a series of assumptions. So right now, the way things have worked out, there's a little bit of cushion in the plan, which I think is great on the front end. The question is, do you want to use that cushion for some additional, pay-as-you-go, use of fund balance type cash projects on the front end, or are you comfortable with those projections, or is it the type of thing where you'd like to maybe keep some of that cushion until you get later on into the plan in the issuance process and you know more how that's going to play out? I think, but certainly that's an option if you all choose to do that, whether it's now or in the future. I think that's something that you could certainly do, and I think it's worth consideration.
Outside of the revenue savings plan, just fund balance itself, what are some of the impacts of, again, using regular fund balance to pay down and not finance some of this as well?
Yeah, so I think it's all in context, right? So you all have a fund balance policy, and typically what that policy says is you're only going to use fund balance in excess of your policy on one-time expenditures or in an emergency situation for non-one-time expenditures. But mainly it's meant for one-time economic development, one-time capital projects. And so in the greater context, are you in compliance with your fund balance policy such that you have excess that can be applied? And then what are you applying that excess for? In your example, exactly, capital projects, certainly that's a good use of that. And then I guess the question is, what's coming down the line in your capital plan? You may have capacity right now and you could choose to fund cash right now, but what do you have in the future, and do you need to be setting aside dollars to be able to get to that point? The other key, or not key, but I think the other consideration with fund balance is it gives you a lot of flexibility when funding your capital plan. So in North Carolina, and I know we've had this conversation before, I feel like I'm always saying it, but I think it's important to note that in North Carolina, typically we don't issue debt until we have bids and permits in hand. That's really what the LGC wants to see. So in order to get to that point of having bids and permits for a capital project, you got to spend some money on the front end for design, engineering, perhaps property acquisition. So having that excess fund balance to be able to cash flow those projects until you get to the point where you can finance it is a very useful tool. So I think just in terms of using fund balance for expenditures or pay-as-you-go capital, certainly a good use within your policy. Makes sense when you can avoid the interest cost. I think those are just some of the other considerations to be mindful of when making those decisions.
My last question, and I know that when these projections were done, those interest rates were fairly conservative, and we're sort of inching towards the conservative place. At what point does the cost of debt become such a large consideration that we really need to reevaluate how we're looking to finance these things? Again, I think the 4 and 5 were conservative then, we're not quite there, but at what area?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question, it's always a matter of perspective where we are at the time, right? So we're going to continue monitoring this, probably getting sick of seeing me, but we're working on this with staff constantly, and we're constantly monitoring it. And if we start to get to the point where we see an issue of cash flow issue, that's when we start to revisit the plan. And is it a matter of revisiting the plan and deferring debt issuance, or not doing any debt issuance because of cash flow purposes? Or yes, interest rates are higher, but we can still cash flow it based upon the projections, and these projects are important enough to continue moving forward with. That's y'all's decision. But that's the type of analysis that we'll be doing to put in front of you all to make those decisions. If the alternative is cash funding versus debt funding a project, and you say debt funding has a high interest rate, so we should look at cash funding something because of that interest rate. That makes a lot of sense. Though I think it's important to think about what are you giving up opportunity cost-wise on the investments side by spending cash. So you kind of got to look at that net cost of cash investment versus debt investment, particularly when interest rates are on the higher end, like you mentioned.
Last follow-up. See, is it still your opinion that we're still in a good environment for borrowing with this?
Certainly. In the context of where we've been historically, we're still in an attractive borrowing environment. Quite honestly, we've just been very spoiled over the last several years of where interest rates have been. But yes, certainly historically, we're still in a good interest rate environment.
Vance, anything?
Questions at this time? No questions.
Yeah.
Questions at this time?
Things further?
No, sir.
Okay.
Happy to look at anything y'all would like us to look at, but.
Okay, well, we still have a nice booklet here we can study as we choose to. But no, thank you very much for coming. It's good to see you again. And I'm sure we'll be inviting you back at the appropriate time. So obviously we're getting dead into the budget season, so we'll see how that turns out. I think we're in good shape, as you say. So thank you for your presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all. Good to see you.
Mr. Mayor, I may say something. The $5.95 million from fund balance where we had the chance to finance it, because of the rapidly escalating cost of land and property, and we've had some opportunities the last 2 or 3 years that we didn't expect. The building behind us, the building beside us. We know we're gonna have to look at something for public works. I mean, it wasn't even the bond referendum. The opportunity to buy the Rand Bryan property for a park that's gonna stay green. The opportunity to buy property with Wake County and Raleigh for a piece of land that's wooded to stay green. So that fund balance came in handy for that. When we didn't expect some of these things, we didn't expect. And so I understand what Damien's saying about the financing, but that flexibility with that is with escalating cost. I think we already realize also that some of our estimations for some of our bond projects are going to be short because of the rapidly increasing cost of construction. So my grandfather used to have an old saying about paying old John back. It's good to go see your friend old John and borrow money from him, but when you got money to pay him back, you pay old John back because you can go and ask old John for money later on. So, and it's just very simple for an old farmer to say something like that, but you know what? If you pay old John back, next time you go visit him, he can help you out a little bit. So I'm not saying the fund balance is old John, but it's a very similar concept. So who knows what other opportunities may present the town in the future. We don't know, but escalating costs are going to affect all of us. And, as Damien mentioned, increasing interest rates. And y'all have always been very conservative on that. So I know you're going to plug in a model. We see you another time, you may have a different rating that's going to change things. But that's why we hire you to tell us that stuff. So thanks again for this information. Maybe our friend Mr. Kennedy, who you know is no longer on here and retired, this is the kind of stuff that he just gets fascinated with, and maybe I'll take it by and let him read it for a few days.
Well, if you do, tell him I said hello.
I will, because he really gets turned on by this stuff.
We very much still have the revenue savings plan as part of the process here, for sure.
Autograph copy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you,
Yes.
Mitch. Good to see you, sir. Okay. Okay, I believe we're down to manager reports. Excuse me.
And we still have
Oh, I'm
more
sorry.
financial reports.
Okay, yeah, okay. Go ahead, Dave. Are these slides in our agenda? For?
Those-
Oh, okay, I don't think they are. It's okay.
Good evening again. So this presentation and discussion sort of piggybacks on what you heard from Davenport earlier, and it's sort of a comprehensive look at debt, one-time opportunities that may be available with the availability of the ARP money that we have, and then also we have a little bit of leftover CARES Act money where we received some reimbursements through Wake County. And we wanted to come and talk about some of that, some of those funds that are available, some of the opportunities that may be available, and how that sort of ties into the overall budget discussion as we progress through formulating the recommended budget that we'll bring to you in May. So just a little refresher on the American Rescue Plan Act. That was signed into law, allocated $1.9 trillion for COVID relief and economic recovery. That $1.9 trillion, some of that went to federal agencies, some went to states, and some went to local governments. And Garner is projected to receive just over $10 million in ARP funding. And we have already received our first tranche of funds back in mid-2021, and that was $5,004,000. So we had all been anxiously awaiting the final rule from Treasury that would give us the clear guidance on how the ARP funds could be spent. And so that rule was issued. We had been operating under the interim final rule for quite a while. The biggest change with the final rule is that it allowed more flexibility for local governments to use the ARP funds they received. So if you'll recall, the original interim guidance had 4 eligible categories for spending. You could spend funds to address COVID public health and negative economic impacts. You could spend it on premium pay for employees, and you could spend it on infrastructure investments, specifically water, sewer, or broadband. And then there was a lost revenue category, and the original interim rule had a formula that you used to determine your lost revenue. And whatever that formula spit out and computed as your lost revenue, that amount of money you could spend on general government services, which is essentially anything the town, any service the town provides. So we were really limited in what that general government services amount could be, because we had, and Garner had very little lost revenue we could document with the formula that had to be used. The final rule allowed for everybody to claim up to $10 million of lost revenue. So, up to your full appropriation capped at $10 million. So if you receive more than $10 million, you could still only claim $10 million of lost revenue. And that is essentially like, kind of think of it like your standard deduction on your taxes. So everybody can claim that as lost revenue. You don't have to document it. There's not a formula that you have to go through to compute how much of that lost revenue you can claim. You are allowed to claim up to $10 million. And then that $10 million can be used in that general government services category. The benefit of that is the general government services category is so broad. We've already budgeted to provide all those services, so you can, in effect, supplant funds that have already been budgeted and loosen some of the strings that are attached to the use of the ARP funds. So it allows you to sort of maximize the benefit of the money and minimize the burden that comes along with the reporting and administrative guidelines that you have to follow for ARP. So you would essentially claim the lost revenue, have $10 million you would set aside as, part of fund balance that would be sitting there and could be used for really any purpose. It would not be limited to the ARP guidelines in those 4 buckets that we could spend that money on. So if there were projects or initiatives, council desired that did not fit within the ARP guidelines, those are things that could be explored as uses for this money. And this, in all of the guidance and the training that I've been a part of for ARP through the School of Government, even through the Treasury Department, they acknowledge that most people are going to choose this path to claim, as much as they can as lost revenue, because it just really allows you so much freedom in how you can use the money. You're not constrained by the spending deadlines that are part of ARP, where you are supposed to have the money encumbered or committed by at least the end of 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. So if we pursued the lost revenue strategy, those time constraints would go away, and we would have more time to decide what projects to use this money on, more time for planning, and wouldn't be subject to probably some of the supply chain issues and getting the adequate number of bids for projects we may pursue, some of those things that people are probably going to run into as they bid things out in the near future. Another opportunity for us, if we pursue the lost revenue method, is we could leverage those ARP dollars to potentially turn those into additional funds. So as I mentioned, there are federal agencies that received ARP money. There are state agencies that received ARP money. So they are going to be setting up programs that local governments are going to be eligible to receive funding through those programs. We may need to match some funding to receive it through those agencies. So again, it kind of takes the strings and the red tape off the ARP money to be used for a lot of things that were not eligible previously. And so we could leverage that and potentially turn that into additional money that could fund projects. We have another small pot of money that we received last year, and this was the CARES Act money, which was prior to the ARP Act. And we did not receive a direct allocation of this money, but Wake County did. And Wake County set up some eligibility guidelines for all the municipalities in the county to seek reimbursement for certain expenditures that they deemed eligible under the CARES Act. And so we submitted for reimbursement and received about $800,000 from Wake County that reimbursed us for expenditures we had on personal protective equipment, the hazard pay that we did for police officers. We did some facility modifications for social distancing and some additional cleaning and sanitizing of our facilities. And the biggest reimbursement was for a 3-month period. Wake County allowed us to file for reimbursement of up to 75% of our public safety expenditures, which they did not include fire in that, but we were able to get a decent sized reimbursement for our police expenditures on personnel. So far, the town has utilized the CARES Act funding for technology and AV upgrades. So we did several upgrades in this room. We've funded some upgrades at GPAC. We funded a camera system for the new rec center. And we also purchased laptops to expand teleworking opportunities for employees. We have a balance of CARES Act money of about $385,000 that's remaining right now. And so as we work through preparing the budget and looking at capital needs within the budget, we have some options as far as how we could spend the ARP money and the CARES Act money. Some initiatives that came out of the planning retreat, some of them are other department initiatives that we have seen submitted as part of the budget request. So the land use update that came from the planning retreat, planning department estimates a cost of about $290,000 for that plan. We have the 3 site assessments that economic development was asked to pursue related to a couple of areas around 540 and the Tharrington-Wilmington area. Those studies are estimated to be about $50,000 a piece, so all 3, you're looking at about $150,000. Have a proposal in hand from DFI to facilitate a housing affordability workshop that would involve 2 sessions with council, and that has a price tag of a little over $10,000. Staff is still working on putting some numbers together for what a cost of services or break-even analysis consultant to do that type of work, what that would cost. We are currently reaching out and trying to find firms that can perform that type of work for us so that we can put a number to that. Some of that will depend on how in-depth that study goes. And then the final option here is what we're calling one-to-one technology. So right now for town staff, we don't have a CPU or a computer tower at our workstations. We have a little box called a thin client, and that runs through some of virtual servers we have in IT. Those thin clients are 10 years old now. They're past their useful life. They're no longer supported. So we're at kind of a crossroads. We either need to purchase new thin clients for everyone. Those do have some limitations, specifically with, or one example of that is with virtual meetings and using Teams for meetings and things like that. The video capacity is not very good with those, so we get a lot of buffering and things like that when we try to use that here on site. So again, a couple options there. We could replace all those thin clients, which is a cost of about $60,000 to replace all the thin clients. Another option, which is recommended here, is to move away from the thin clients and go to a laptop that is docked at everyone's workstation. So we would have a dock that has a USB cord that plugs into the laptop. That obviously has some advantages for mobility. Someone could just unhook their laptop, take it with them, work on things from home instead of having, borrow a laptop or have one issued through IT. The cost of that is about $112,000, so not quite double what the thing, but it is an improvement, I think, in the technology would have and the user experience for employees. So these are things that as staff has worked on the budget, we have identified as, again, possible one-time uses of ARP and CARES funding. We think the one-to-one technology is a good use of the CARES Act money that we have left because it sort of follows the pattern of spending that we have done previously on using those funds for technology. So that we would recommend that we fund through the CARES Act money that we have available. The other 4 items we believe would be good uses of one-time ARP money. again, we don't know the cost of the municipal services analysis, but the other three items is about $450,000. And again, by going through that lost revenue process with the ARP funds, that would free up these potential uses for that fund, for those funds, because economic development related things were not eligible uses under the prior ARP guidance. And so we're hoping to just get a little direction from council tonight on their appetite for using these one-time funds for these purposes, and that will help staff as we continue to develop the budget and give us some information as we look at other capital needs that are out there. With that, be glad to take questions or see if John, Jody, Rodney have any additional input.
Yeah, anything from the assistant managers regarding David's comments?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Thank you, David, for providing that comprehensive presentation and an update to the council on where we are as far as thinking about some of these one-time funding opportunities before us. The other opportunity before the council is to provide staff some consensus on moving forward with some of these items. They're directly from the planning retreat that the council held in February. And by giving us consensus to move forward allows us to do it in the current fiscal year so that we can go ahead and move forward with any bid processes or proposals that we need to do. Of course, contracts would come back to the council for consideration and approval, but allowing us to move forward in the current fiscal year allows us to get ahead on some of these projects, which we know are going to inform some of our further conversations related to budget, related to the capital improvement plan, and also some additional discussions that the council wants to have on priorities for spending some of the supplanted ARP dollars. So that's why we bring this list to you this evening for consideration. Because we've heard the opportunity and we've heard the priorities from the council from the retreat, and we have an opportunity to go ahead and move forward using some of these one-time streams. The final thing I would mention with the technology piece, if we actually look at the $60,000, which we're going to have to if we don't move forward with our one-on-one strategy with technology, we are going to have to replace our thin clients, which is about a $60,000 investment. So when you actually look at new dollars for this type of technology for a higher level of service, and it provides a user experience that's much better for both the user and the person on the other end of the technology, it's about $52,000 of new dollars that's going to be needed to implement this strategy. So I wanted to frame that for the council just so you understand that we're going to have to be making some investments in this technology, and our recommendation is to move forward with this new strategy, knowing that we have some additional CARES dollars available to do that at this time. So thank you for this opportunity, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, okay. Seems like good information to me, but council, Mr. Matthews, start with you. Any questions, comments?
Not right now. Yes, I have several. Okay, on the thin clients in this strategy here, I'm just curious why we didn't go ahead and wrap that up in the audio AV computerization stuff that we spent. I mean, if they knew this was coming, why didn't we just go ahead and do that?
Well, the technology that we spent the CARES money on before was more related to going virtual as far as meetings and the shutting down of town hall and those things, and more of serving the public was a big part of that.
We did buy a number of laptops through those dollars, and we're now realizing that that is a more solid solution than we have. And so these additional dollars of 112 would really just be buying the balance to roll out to everyone who didn't get one previously.
Okay.
And it's similar to the laptops you have. I mean, some staff got some of those.
Okay, so you're saying for this particular, the one-on-one strategy, that the 112 will be best coming from CARES funding, because that's what we've done in the past, because it's related to what's been done, right? But then you're also saying that the other items that we talked about at the retreat maybe shouldn't come from CARES, it should come from ARP. And the reason I'm asking that is, okay, we take there's 385 left, there's 112, let's say it's 115, that leaves 270. So what's the 270 from CARES going forward? I mean, how long do you have to spend that money? Is it unlimited, or I'm just curious?
Is there a timetable on that?
We don't have a time limit to spend the CARES Act
Okay.
money, so it's much like we're talking about doing with the ARP money. We supplanted money already in our budget with the reimbursements from WAKE, so we don't have any time constraints on that.
Okay.
And Mr. Singleton, I would add to that, we have some additional technology needs that we may be bringing forward to the council for consideration for the remaining balance for the CARES dollars in the coming weeks. But to your point, as we would bring forward a contractor proposal for the council's consideration of any of these items, we would then identify what would be the appropriate funding source. So it could be some of the CARES dollars, or it could be some of the supplanted ARP dollars.
And so going through the budget process, we already know technology needs never stop. They just keep going. So you've already possibly identified some of those that maybe some of this additional CARES money can be spent on in the future.
Yes, we have an issue that we're addressing now, and once we come up with a solution and a cost estimate for that, we'll be bringing it forward to the council for consideration.
But just glad to know that we're rolling along that same train of thought. Okay, that's all for now, Mr. Mayor. I may come back. I'll see what
Sure.
others
Thank
ask.
you.
Mr. Singleton, I would just add one minor thing too. Another reason for the request now is that we would not only be able to complete those purchases, we'd be able to do it with the very same technology that we've already purchased. We have a window of time in which we could make everything the same and not run the risk of having to change to some other type of devices or models if we wait longer.
Good.
David, I'm not interested in having you to repeat things, but maybe just to make sure I'm hearing correctly, when the ARP funds were first instituted in the general rules, there were specific timeframes for a governmental entity to set a date for a project, and then you had those timeframes set in for when you had to spend those funds. I heard you say that the rules that have now been published, those time constraints are no longer applicable.
That's correct. So the original interim guidance said that you should have the money encumbered or committed, so you would have contracts in hand for a project by the end of 2024 and the money spent by 2026. You run a little risk if you do that, because if you commit to a project and you've reported that you're going to use your ARP funds for that at the end of 2024, and you have those additional 2 years to actually spend the money, if something happens and you don't go through with that project, you're probably not going to be able to repurpose that money for another use. So there is a little risk if you try to stretch everything out to 2026. But with the strategy we are recommending with the ARP money to use the lost revenue and supplanting, we would not have those same issues with time.
Okay, thank you. Somebody shares. Ms. Behringer.
I don't have any questions. It just looks like a well thought out, well assigned plan, and I'm.
Okay, Mr. Dellinger, anything?
So, on this CARES money and the technology, I think that's a good use of that money. For the ARP money, for every large pot of money we have in this town, whether it's fund balance, revenue savings, we have a policy on how we can and will utilize that money. I'm a little concerned with the talk of we have all the time we need to do what we want, because then the money just sits there. There's no initiative or urgency around finding a place to use those dollars. It sounds like we're going to be passive about it, and if the opportunity comes, we'll go after it. We really need a policy around that money that's not too lenient, but also not too strict. I think one of the ideas I had proposed was certain conditions, maybe even a rubric on how we spend the money, that it has to be matched, at least dollar for dollar, it has to generate revenue. I think really we should really create pots of money from this that we can allocate to certain things. So we talked about our retreat. The three things we focused on in the retreat were growth, So in that category, you've got comprehensive plans and transportation issues. You have economic development, which is land control, site studies, economic development partner work, and then housing affordability. So those were like, we spent 2 days coming up with those most important items. And so I think we need to create a 1 or 2 page guiding document on how we're going to spend this ARP money, and not say, and we can then be flexible on it if we need to change it and another opportunity comes up. But if you don't have structure or constraint, it kind of just languishes there, and it gets nibbled away at budget cycle after budget cycle. And it's a once in a generational opportunity. But without guidelines, we're not focused enough to recognize the opportunities to say, oh, this fits in with our guidelines for art money. We should really pursue this. And it's a burden on staff to try to, it gives them guidance to target their search for opportunities. These are parameters I need to look for to utilize this money. There's matching money over here, the county's doing this. So I think as we go through the budget this year, by the end of this fiscal year, it'd be good to have that document so we can work on that as council and as staff and say, okay, these are the guidelines we're going to have for our art money, and we want to have it spent by our own deadline, right? That we again could change, it could change, another council could come along and say, that's a terrible policy, we need a new one. But I think it helps us if we can have rails, you know, on that money. And so I think figuring out how we divide it up is a good conversation for council on priorities. Is this percent go here and this here and this here? That's my recommendation or thought. I just don't like the idea of the money just kind of, we have this money and array of, you know, will come down from the heavens and tell us how to spend it right. So that's my feedback. It's a great opportunity, and I want us to make the best of it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vance.
Questions at the time?
Okay. Bill, did I get you? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Singh.
At retreat, items 2, 3, and 4, we specifically said we'd like to follow through with. So I have no problems at all since staff wants some direction on how to get started. I'm getting started on small area plans, site assignments. I think that's what that all is. Housing affordability workshop we've talked about, and the cost of municipal services. I understand Damien's talk about having some guidelines, which is fine. We've already said we wanted to get at least these three things done, and maybe including the top one. And the sooner we get started, the better. We've got proposals for economic development corridor sites in the northeastern part of town that, you know, we got residential proposals basically sitting in the middle of it. What will be an economic development commercial area? We need to get these small study plans done, get them started so we can know where we're going. Housing affordability is something that's almost changing by the week with the escalating cost of residential property, and municipal services is something I think we're all curious to know exactly what it's costing for our municipal services since the last one was done some 10 years ago. So I have no problem in thumbs upping those three to give staff some guidance to whoever's going to start working through that process. I'm assuming on the small area plans we'd have to work up and get proposals from different people, et cetera, et cetera. The workshop is a workshop that we could schedule, and the cost of municipal services is, I reckon, depending on the level, as David mentioned, you put out requests for services. So I have no trouble in getting those three started because we already all agreed to retreat. We wanted to do that. So moving forward with that is, to me, is let's go. Because it's going to take time, and we're sitting here talking about it tonight. We talked about the retreat in February, and when we actually get it back in our hand, who knows when that'll be.
Mr. Singh, we do think that the first one would sort of inform all the other ones. So I think that and Mr. Triesenberg's online if he wants to add anything. But we really felt like that one encompassed a lot of the discussion that was had at the retreat, and that the other three can time into that. I think Jeff is thinking about a scenario that's about a 6-month window. One of the reasons we're asking about this now is that we don't have to wait till July to start. We can start it with a May-June timeframe for the top one, and then slot in the other three at the fourth one could be any time. But the second and third one really have times in which we believe they slot in naturally to the other work. And we've sort of verified that with the DFI folks, as there's an appropriate time to slot that into the discussion. So I think we would just ask for consideration that we could sort of consider all 4 of those, at least the top 3, as sort of a package deal that are going to all feed off of each other, and then the municipal services we can do as soon as we find out the right scope and the right providers. But we feel like all 3 of those top ones do inform one another. They don't have to be done together, but we believe the outcomes would be much more successful if we consider them at the same time.
I'm not opposed. I wasn't suggesting we wait to start on any of these for that. I'm just saying for the rest, this is small, very small piece, and it is urgent and connected to our retreat objectives, is more just going forward. I'm in favor of moving on this stuff because growth related, the sooner we start, it always takes us a long time to get things done. So the sooner we can get it started, the sooner we can, get it done. So.
Okay, good conversation, sure enough. Okay. Anything else for David? Okay. Thank you very much. Covered a lot of stuff there, short order. Okay. Thank you, David. Are we ready for your report now, Mr. Manager?
I think so. I think everybody's got all of the direction we need for staff. I think we're good.
I didn't miss you, did I?
To his current agenda item that's up now, did he get his guidance?
I'm sorry.
Did he receive his guidance?
Yes.
I wasn't clear on that piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We're basically going to move forward with all the items up there, and we're still waiting on the cost and find a consultant for the study, the break-even study.
Okay, gotcha.
The previous consultant we used may not be in business anymore. We hadn't been able to locate that one, so we're still exploring that. All right, thanks. Under manager reports, at the back of your packet, you have the pending agenda items listed there. I won't read through that, but just the items for the April 4th, 19th, and 26th meetings, things that are coming up. And of course, that is subject to change as the days and weeks go by. Some things might fall off, and we may add some things here and there. Some of the things you heard tonight will be on your April 4th meeting. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was on April 9th, we will have the extravaganza. So we're moving back into having our public events and seeing the public back out and enjoying our parks and having gatherings. So that's April 9th, starting at 10 a.m. And the first egg hunt will be at 10:30. So, and that's all I had. Anything else from anybody?
Anything else from system managers?
The only other thing, Mayor and members of council, I would mention is we'll have our first public hearing for the budget process during the April 4th meeting. And so we'll have an opportunity just to share with the community that we've started that process, provide a brief update as far as our timeline, but really sort of open up the opportunity for the public to give feedback and input to the budget process.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Manager. And Mr. Attorney, I don't know if we had you officially on the agenda here, but I'll give you an opportunity if you have any particular reports. I know we'll have a closed session here in a few minutes, right?
Yes, I don't have an additional report this evening outside of the closed session.
Okay, all right. All right, anything else from council before we move into closed session? I believe we've covered everything on the agenda unless there's an item I missed. Okay, hearing and seeing none. All right, do you want to take about a 10-15 minute break now? And when we come back, we'll hear a motion to go into closed session. Will that be okay?
Or do you want to go ahead and do the motion to go into closed session?
Well, I guess we could, yeah. Okay. Motion to that effect. You see the citation there?
I move we go into a closed session pursuant to General Statutes 143-318.11, subset A, subset 5, to discuss possible real estate acquisition in the town's negotiation position regarding such real estate.
Is there a second? Mr. Matthews seconded, okay. Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
If there's any opposition, no.
Excuse me. Did you also want to call for a closed session on personnel this evening?
Is section 6?
Yes, that would be section 143-318.11A6.
Okay, thank you. So we'll add that to it. We've already voted on the motion, so by general consent, we can approve that additional item for the closed session, right? Okay. All right, then I'm going to declare that we are in recess for at least 10 minutes. Let's try to get ready to go into closed session by 8:15, if you will. Okay. The mayor's going to declare that the council is out of closed session and back into regular session. In the closed session, we spent some time discussing a real estate issue and gave staff some further direction on that. That'll come back to council at a future date. We also dealt with a personnel matter, and council came to some conclusions about a future meeting in regards to concluding the personnel matter that's before us. So beyond that, I believe the only thing left for us is the council reports that we didn't do in regular session. So at this time, I'm sure council can be fairly concise and brief. So I'll recognize any council members who wants to make a report, and I'll start with Mr. Matthews over here.
Nothing this time, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Singleton?
I thought maybe you might mention the wall that heals just the time while you got the chance.
Okay, we can plug that in. I'll make it real brief. They're setting up the wall tomorrow. They got an earlier start on it today, and Thursday through Sunday at lunchtime, it will be open 24 hours a day. They have tours available. Or if you just want to come there on your own, you can do it. It's going to be a remarkable thing, and it was an honor to escort it in today from Clayton, and a moving thing for especially a lot of Vietnam vets as we're aging out. So come and see it. It'll be worth your time, and bring the kids.
Thank you, Phil. Ms. Behringer? Mr. Dellinger?
Yeah, just briefly, wasn't able to see the procession that brought in the wall. I saw a picture of Mr. Matthews standing next to a motorcycle that he alleges he drove. But I had to attend the funeral of Mr. Elwood King this afternoon. He passed away last week. He was a Garner resident for almost 60 years. He was a member of First Baptist Church, and he was a founding member of the Garner Optimist Club, and served the community through the church and the Optimist Club for many decades. And it was a good service. A lot of his family was there. I think the entire Optimist Club was there. But I just want to acknowledge his contribution to the town, and he'll be missed.
Thank you, Mr. Dellinger. Mr. Vance?
Nothing to report tonight.
Okay, thank you.
And he was a good man who spent countless hours volunteering Optimist when they were in the basketball league. Whether it's concessions or coaching, as his son did, who passed away a few years ago, Elwood Jr. They spent countless hours volunteering, and he was known. I think his nickname was Chief, because he would lead when they did cooking and so forth. My father worked with him at Dix Hill, so he knew him also. But I think his nickname was Chief because he was in charge. If there was a project, he was running the show.
And I will just briefly state, sort of in regards to Phil's comments, I think we were off to a good start with getting the wall here and the sort of the surroundings around that. A lot of people showed up, that maybe more than we had anticipated. So I encourage all of you as council members. By the way, Mr. Stevens is still willing to give us sort of our tour on Saturday at about 1 o'clock. So those of you who might be interested, just come on out, I guess, to wherever the sort of the starting place is when you take a tour. I guess it would be very close to the wall, maybe to the museum area.
They'll have a tent and all registration area. You can meet right there. Yes, sir.
So 1 o'clock Saturday, and then hopefully you could stick around for the walk to the park by the veterans from the church there, sort of like a parade. So that'll happen on Saturday as well. Did you have something, Mr. Manager?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay, all right.
Making sure I had that time correct in my.
Yep, okay. And that's all I have. So thank you, council, for those reports. I believe that's the last thing on our agenda, so I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
There's no opposition. Declare this meeting of the Garner work session to be ended.